The Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. The Holy Spirit is often associated primarily with the New Testament, especially Pentecost and the life of the early church. However, this view is incomplete. The Old Testament presents a clear, though progressive, revelation of the Holy Spirit's presence and activity. While the Spirit's work in the Old Testament differs in form from the New Testament experience, it is foundational to understanding God's redemptive plan. The Spirit in creation and sustaining life. The first explicit reference to the Spirit appears at creation. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, Genesis 1 verse 2. This portrays the Spirit as active, intentional, and powerful, participating in the ordering of chaos into creation. Job affirms this role. The Spirit of God has made me. The breath of the Almighty gives me life, Job 33 verse 4. In the Old Testament, the Spirit is therefore not abstract energy, but the life-giving presence of God. The Spirit empowering leaders and individuals. A dominant Old Testament theme is empowerment for specific tasks. The Spirit comes upon individuals temporarily to accomplish God's purposes. Judges such as Othniel, Gideon, and Samson are notable examples. Judges 3 verse 10, 6 verse 34, 14:6. Their empowerment was not primarily moral but functional, enabling leadership, courage, or supernatural strength. This selective and task-oriented empowerment highlights God's sovereignty rather than human merit. The Spirit and kingship. The Spirit played a decisive role in Israel's monarchy. Saul initially received the Spirit to lead, 1 Samuel 10 verse 6, but his disobedience resulted in the Spirit's departure, 1 Samuel 16 verse 14. In contrast, David was anointed, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day forward, 1 Samuel 16 verse 13. David's later plea, "Do not take your Holy Spirit from me," Psalm 51 verse 11, reveals that the Spirit's presence was not guaranteed or permanent. This reinforces the Old Testament pattern. The Spirit could be withdrawn due to covenantal failure. The Spirit inspiring prophets. The prophets consistently attributed their message to the Spirit of God. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me, 2 Samuel 23 verse 2. Ezekiel repeatedly describes the Spirit entering him, enabling him to stand and speak, Ezekiel 2 verse 2. The Spirit's role here is revelatory, communicating God's will, confronting sin, and calling Israel back to covenant faithfulness. Prophetic inspiration was not human insight, but divine initiative. The Spirit and wisdom, skill, and artistry. The Spirit's work extended beyond leadership and prophecy. Bezalel, the craftsman of the tabernacle, was filled with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and skill. Exodus 31 verse 3. This demonstrates that the Spirit was involved in practical intelligence, creativity, and excellence. The Old Testament rejects the idea that spiritual activity is limited to religious speech. Craftsmanship and beauty were also Spirit-enabled. Anticipation of a new covenant work. Although the Spirit's presence in the Old Testament was real, it was limited and selective. The prophets anticipated a future shift. Joel foretold a time when God would pour out his Spirit on all people. Joel 2 verses 28 to 29. Ezekiel promised an internal transformation. "I will put my Spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes." Ezekiel 36 verse 27. These promises acknowledge the insufficiency of the old pattern and point toward a more permanent, inward work. Theological significance. The Old Testament presents the Holy Spirit as fully divine, active, and personal. However, his work is primarily external and episodic rather than internal and continuous. This does not imply inferiority, but reflects the unfolding nature of revelation. The Old Testament prepares the ground for the New Testament by demonstrating humanity's dependence on divine empowerment and the failure of external transformation alone. Conclusion. The Holy Spirit in the Old Testament is not absent, obscure, or secondary. He is present at creation, active in leadership, decisive in prophecy, and essential for wisdom and skill. Yet his work is intentionally limited, pointing forward to a future covenant where the Spirit would dwell permanently within God's people. Understanding the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament is essential for grasping the continuity and depth of biblical theology and the full meaning of the Spirit's outpouring in the New Testament.